We're going to turn our attention to Erin, and Erin's going to give us some tips on better presentations and teaching adults. Yes?
Yes.
All right.
And it occurred to me yesterday. My name is Erin Everett. I'm a program planner like Barbara, and it occurred to me yesterday that I am giving a presentation on how to give good presentations, and that freaked me out a little bit. So please bear with me. I do have a background in adult education, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and about some tips on presentations and on delivering CLE. So the first thing does everybody have their phones? I want you to get your phones or your iPads or whatever out, if you do have them. Because
Should we do it too?
Yes. I have a poll for you, and you can participate via text. If you can't see on the screen, you can text Pinnacle to 22333 to join. And the question is, or the options are, adults learn best from, and your options are lecture, reading, discussion, audio-visual aids, practice by doing or repeating, or immediate application of learning by teaching and doing. So if you want to go ahead and take some time to vote, and we should start to see, oh, that says the poll is not active.
You do show of hands.
Great, show of hands.
There we go. Always be ready to roll with it.
Who says lecture? Nobody says lecture. Okay, reading. Discussion. All right, a couple discussions. Audiovisual aids. 0. Practice by doing or repeating. Yes. And immediate application of learning or by teaching and doing. All right, so here the answers to the poll that doesn't work. Sorry. Yeah, immediate use of learning, or what we can teach and what we can do, is the best way for people to learn, including adults. It's not just children. Lecture is the worst, or at least in terms of retention, lecture is the worst form of learning that there is. So that brings up some questions for how we do CLE. I think you can all recognize that. Typically what you see up here and what you're seeing a little bit of now is talking heads, right? And I know that that's the way we all learned in school. It's typical, and that's just not how people learn. So I want to talk to you a little bit about adult learning, about how adults learn, but I also want to talk to you about a study that was done by ALI, ABA, where they talked to lawyers to identify what are the problems with CLE other than it's too expensive. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that part. So one problem they identified is that the quality of CLE is dependent on the presenter. So you don't know what you're getting until you come into the room. So the presentation is key, and even if it's great information, if the presentation is not great, people are not satisfied with that. They also specifically remarked on the lack of interaction between presenters and the attendees. And I know in this setting, a lot of times it's difficult to have an interaction, especially when we're filming, and that's why we're always running around with the microphones and driving you guys crazy with the microphones, because we want to capture for the web audience any conversations that are being had. And another thing that they said was that they feel like they're getting an informational experience and not an educational experience. As a matter of fact, in the survey, only 15% of the respondents felt that they were getting knowledge that exceeded their expectations at CLE. That's grim. That's very grim. 15% exceeded. Everybody else was just like, okay, it was fine. So, so we're going to talk about kind of what is the point of CLEs? And I know Trish alluded earlier and Tim alluded earlier, of course you want to draw your membership in, you want to connect with people, maybe you want to get more people in your section, you want to make money, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, and the reason that I do this job, is that I believe strongly that the purpose of CLE is to educate and to give a quality learning experience that people can take back to their offices and apply what they've learned, because that's valuable. We're here to service the bar, and we're here to make people better lawyers, right? And I hope that if you don't agree with me, raise your hand. Okay, good. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about, I'm just going to cover a couple of adult learning concepts. This is covered more fully in your materials. How you can engage adult learners without, kind of a childish game type of situation. How we can combat the ever dwindling attention spans of everyone, not just children, but adults too. Some effective PowerPoint tips. General presentation tips, and how to moderate a panel effectively. So first, adult learning. This was a form. Okay, so I used to teach adults, right? Ask me how much experience I had teaching adults when I started teaching adults.
How much experience did you have teaching?
Zero. I had zero, and I knew nothing about adult learning theory, and I thought this was stupid when I first learned about it. So bear with me, but it. As I started to teach and saw it in practice, it really makes a lot of sense. And the first principle is that the learning needs to be relevant to and practical to the attendee. People are not coming here to hear stuff they already know. They're not coming here to hear theoretical, academic sorts of things. I don't know. I mean, I sort of like knowing that stuff, but most people, they want, like Barbara said, they want you to solve a problem. They've got problems. They've got things that are keeping them up at night. It needs to be relevant to their practice. Remember that adults bring knowledge and experience to the room. You are not the only, we're not the only people up here who know things. Everybody in this room knows things. You have a background, you have practice, you have work experience, you have life experience. You need to capitalize on that, Ask the people in the room for their input as well. If they have suggestions, maybe they can answer a question you can't, and that's very beneficial. Adults are problem or goal oriented. They want information that's going to help them solve problems. So doing problem solving activities like the hypotheticals we all took in law school that weren't until the end of the class and the exam, we probably should have been practicing those ahead of time because that's how you learn things. They want to be able, as I said before, to apply what they've learned. And everybody has different learning styles, and this is probably not news to you. Some people are visual, some people like to hear things, some people take notes, etc. So you kind of have to speak to all of those styles in order to capture most of the people in the room. A couple of other points about adult learning theory. Again, I said practical and problem-centered. One thing that you can do is to find out, let's say you're doing a seminar on criminal defense, and it's specifically on OWI. You've got a lot of OWI practitioners in the room. Find out what it is they want to know from you. Because if you're covering stuff that they already know or that's kind of basic or just general knowledge, that CLE is not going to be particularly helpful to them, right? So my recommendation would be to survey them, at the start, say, what are your issues? What do you need help with? And then you're going to kind of need to adapt to that, and that can be a challenge, but that's something I think is very beneficial. You always want to try to give overviews, case studies, examples to make it concrete, to make it practical to people. I covered a couple of these other points already, asked them at the outset. Use collaborative, real-life problem-solving activities. Get them to pair up with the person next to them and hash out a problem. Again, I know this doesn't, Dennis is sitting back there going, oh no, don't do that, I can't film that. But it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to learn. And also you want to reiterate why what you're teaching them is going to help them. And I've got some pointers in your materials about how you can do that. You can say things like, you might want to pay attention to this because this happened to me and it was terrible, and let me tell you why it's useful. It really kind of drives the point home. Another thing you want to do is you want to integrate what they already know with what you're teaching them. So you want to acknowledge that they have experience. Ask them to recall what they already know about what you're teaching, if anything. And sometimes in some of the beginner CLEs that we do, they might not know anything. That's okay. You can do a show of hands. How many people have practiced in this area before? You're still getting a gauge of what the level of knowledge in the room is, and that's important. I already covered this one. And also, I think it's important to suggest follow-up ideas to the attendees on how they can take what you're teaching them back to their office and immediately start using that, start putting it to work for them. Any of you who've seen a seminar with Dave Kreckler, he's very good at this. He's very good at pointing out, here's how you can use this, and here's why it's going to help you, and I think that's great. So just integrate that, what they already know, with what you're teaching them, because that's how people remember things, right? They're building on their knowledge, okay? I have another poll here, but now I'm afraid it's not going to work, so.
No.
Yeah. So let's just throw it out there, and I'll just repeat. You can just yell out, do you have any ideas on how to engage seminar attendees? Just throw it out. I'll repeat the answers for, you don't have to run around. How do we engage them? How do we get them to participate? Giveaways. Tyson is very good at that. Tyson gives away a lot of nice stuff. In the event that you don't have a lot of money, how do you engage? I guess candy would be a good one. Yes.
Small group activities.
Small group activities. Great. That's a great one. We have one in the back.
Tapping into lawyers' competitive streaks and setting up competitions.
Setting up.
Like a game show sort of.
Yes, game shows are great, and I'll tell you, there are PowerPoint templates out there for Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and all sorts of stuff that you can just type your information right into. They're on the internet. They're out there everywhere. Any other suggestions?
Physical activity, standing up when you're doing a poll or not.
Oh yeah, that would be a great one. So if all the lawyers who've done such and such in the room stand up, would be fantastic. So he said physical activity. So I'm going to give you a couple of other suggestions. Those are all really great. Why is it's like spinning. Yeah, could you? Yep. Another example would be to actually make your poll work. All right, so.
Well, you just exhibited another one too, though. You asked for direct feedback, and
still
you
not
made them
working.
give you direct feedback.
That's true. It's not working. I don't know why. So here are a couple ways you can get creative. And this first one is something that I learned actually at that's actually not the first one. Something I learned from a presenter. I don't know what is going on with this PowerPoint, but we'll talk about that later. Use multimedia. So if you've got a film clip, right? If you've got a short video clip that's relevant, or we had a criminal defense seminar last year where they showed an actual police interrogation. I mean, that really breaks up, what you're doing. Use PowerPoint. Use funny, serious, or personal anecdotes. People love stories, right? Especially funny ones. Lawyers like to laugh. I know there's some kind of perception that they don't. I don't think that's true, right? Use low stakes quiz questions or polling, which is what we've been doing. And by low stakes, I mean there's no wrong answer, or if you use the anonymous poll, no one knows who's answering what. So that's great. One presenter during one seminar would throw out random trivia questions that weren't even about law. And it was a great way to just kind of break it up and make people participate and make people pay attention. Questions and discussion are obviously a really great way to engage your audience. Hypotheticals and games, as was already mentioned. So those are great ways. I think I've got another poll now. At this point, I'm just like, so, no, you can go ahead. So this might surprise you. And the reason I talk so much about engagement and about kind of breaking up your presentation, the average attention span in 2013 was 8 seconds. 8 seconds. That's like not a lot of seconds, right? So some of these ways to kind of switch it up, rather than just having a person talking at the podium, which I'm not saying is a bad thing always, but you're going to lose people. You're going to lose people, right? We're all on our phones. We all have lives. We're doing stuff. I just got a text from my mom and probably lost attention. That was before I was talking, though, so it was when Scott was talking. So so I want to talk a little bit about how you can conquer these short attention spans. You want to, like I said, break your presentation into chunks with small breaks. These breaks can be pretty simple, as varying your media, even pausing for a second to kind of emphasize a point is good enough to break up your presentation. Make sure that, especially during a long presentation, you're going to kind of stop and reiterate what you've covered and check to see if people know what you're talking about, if people have questions. Call on attendees at random. I know people don't like that, but I'll tell you what, my con law professor, he was great at this. He was also very scary, and we all paid attention in that class the entire time. So, you know, if you're comfortable with it, do that. Use humor as appropriate. Seek opinions and input from your audience, and use images, videos, and other teaching methods to engage. So I'm kind of lost on what my next slide is because I think I have a different, oh yes, effective use of PowerPoint. So it is a fact that most people actually learn better when they can associate a visual with what you're teaching them. But what we see time and time again, and I'm sure you've seen it, are really, really ineffective PowerPoints. So if you want to move to the next slide, here's some tips. There are more tips in your handout. More pictures, fewer words is huge. Highlight your keywords and your salient points. Use SmartArt graphics, and I'll show you a couple of examples of how you can do that. That's built right into PowerPoint. It just makes things look prettier, and you don't have to use as many words. Remember to use standard fonts that most people can read. And we really don't want you to rely on your slides as handouts, okay? This slide or this PowerPoint presentation as a handout, and I have copies of it, I'll give it to you, but it's not going to be as helpful as a full outline. This is really more of a visual aid to keep those of you who are visual learners engaged, right?
Well, and the other point on that is not using your slides as your handout, and don't use them as your note cards.
Yeah.
Because people can read the slide a whole heck of a lot faster than you can get through the content, and then you're just asking them to say to you, well, you just read your slides to me. Well, no, they were really just my notes. Don't put your notes up on the screen. Just put the key points.
No, yeah. So here's an example of a SmartArt slide, and this, like I said, this is right into PowerPoint. It's an option you can use. These are basically bullet points, but it makes it look a little more visual, a little more attractive. You can go on to the next one. Another example, this would be a way to show a hierarchy of sorts, which, you know, this isn't relevant to you guys, but some kind of hierarchy would be helpful. And then, next, please. Another way to kind of show a process or kind of to show how to work your way through a series of questions. This is easy to do, you guys. All you have to do is select which graphic you want to use, and then it tells you where to type the text. That's it. It's actually quite easy. So those are good ways to kind of visualize things and use less words to make your points. Worst thing you can do on a PowerPoint slide. Please do not do this. And even worse than that is when you read this, okay? Like Tim said, you guys can read, and you probably can't read that, but I mean, you can read, everybody can read. If you need to put this much information in something, put it in your written materials, you know, so people can refer to it. It's a worthless PowerPoint slide. This is a great example, and this is actually something Keith Finley did for a presentation last year on a great use of a visual, right? So he's got a chart here about wrongful conviction factors, and it just gives a nice graphic representation without a lot of words, with a little bit of color. It's simple, yet it's effective. I think I have one more from him after that, same thing. You know, it's graphs, it's visual, it's simple but effective. So I think he did a great job with that. This is actually where I was going to start with the Breaking Bad thing. So Steve Hughes is a presenter that I saw, 2 years, not quite 2 years ago. And he has this method of like how to start a good presentation. And he calls it the Spark method, but I like to call it Breaking Bad. Because who in here is a Breaking Bad fan or who has seen the series? Yes. So how does Breaking Bad start? Anybody? What's the first opening scene in Breaking Bad? He's in his underwear, and he's got a gas mask on, and there's like an RV on fire right next to him, and this is the first scene, and you're like, I have to watch what this is about, right? I have to. So it's kind of a hook. Like it's a way to draw people in to where they want to know what is going to happen next. So Steve Hughes calls this the SPARK method. So if you want to go to the next bullet. So start big, break bad, surprising statistics, funny stories, that type of thing. Use a picture to connect what you're talking about. Use an anecdote or a story. Great funny stories are good. Really compelling stories are good too. Even sad ones are sometimes good. Use a real life example to really drive your point home. And then I think there's 2 cues. Ask a question that can be rhetorical or otherwise, and use a quote. So that's kind of some tips on starting a good presentation. Because once you start, once you've hooked them, they're going to keep paying attention until you do something like that PowerPoint I showed you earlier with too many words on it. So general presentation tips, and really you can use these or you can find these in your materials as well. But you want to be enthusiastic about your subject. If I were to get up here today and say, I'm going to talk to you about ethics and ethics, ethics. Sorry, Aviva, ethics. I've lost you, right? You don't want to listen to that. And I'm not saying, yeah. Okay, Aviva does. So be enthusiastic, outline your goals at the start of your presentation. Always give practical suggestions and examples, like I said. Make a list of key points and reiterate those points at the end. Please don't end your presentation early, as we've alluded to. One big pet peeve that we have is people saying, I'm running out of time, or I don't have enough time to finish. This happens a lot, and it's understandable. I think a better thing to say is, I have a lot more material in my outline that I hope, will be beneficial to you, that you can look over at the end of the presentation or when you get back to work. Otherwise, you sound kind of unprepared or like you didn't plan.
Yeah, and you can turn it into a benefit.
Right.
I've got all this great information here for you to use as a resource, but in my final minutes, I want to focus on this.
Right, exactly. And then always welcome questions, from the audience, I think is great presentation tips. I also have some tips on moderating, or that too. No apologies. I have like an old version of my PowerPoint. Which is another thing you shouldn't do. I did that on purpose. Again, I know ethics is boring. This topic is dry, so bear with me. I don't have time. It's a nice day, and we're all stuck in here.
Yeah.
Not setting a good tone, right?
Yeah, that's another one of those natural tendencies.
It is, but
Don't need to do it.
don't need to do it. Yeah, it's not helpful. All right, so you want to moderate a panel. They talked about this a little bit already, but I think biggest thing is you want to prepare in advance. Have a list of questions. Make sure the panelists know what you plan to talk about. Give them the list of questions. Keep it relevant. Keep people on point. Keep them on pace. Don't let one person dominate. Don't take over the discussion, and make sure to engage the panelists in the audience, and then kind of interject when you need to do so. Barbara? Ending your presentation, all right. So, when people end their presentation with, are there any questions? Exactly what just happened happens. There's just like this dead kind of cricket silence. I'm not saying you shouldn't encourage questions from people. I'm saying, are there any questions might not be the best way to ask that question. So, make sure that you do address any questions that come up, but I would not end the presentation. I wouldn't make that the last thing you say. I would probably make that closer to the last thing, or close to the last thing, but not the last thing.
That's especially important if you're doing just a standalone webcast. I don't know how many folks have done programs where they don't have the live audience, but there's a buffer and a delay there for people receiving that. So just like in the room here, there's going to take a little bit of time for somebody to say, oh yeah, I do have a question. On a webcast, that might be 3 minutes.
And then it's over.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
So-
So if you want questions, kind of prime that pump earlier, and maybe at the start or closer to the start of your presentation. I'm going to have some time at the end if you want to ask questions, think of them along the way, save them up, and we'll do them then.
yeah, or offer to take them, during the presentation. Some people, by the way, don't feel comfortable asking questions out loud. I would give them the option to write them down and bring them up or bring them to whoever's monitoring the room. We do that all the time, not a problem. Make sure you thank the audience for their time and attention. If you're comfortable with it, go ahead and give them your contact information if they can contact you with additional questions. And I think finally, you want to let them know what's happening next. So if there's about to be a break, you want to let them know there's about to be a break if the program is concluding, or if there's going to be another presenter, just like we talked about with transitions. So here's another poll that probably doesn't work, but true or also true, this is the greatest presentation I've ever seen. True.
I vote also true.
Okay, also true. Good, great. Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. My contact info is up here. It's also in your materials. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and I hope you'll check it out, and I hope this has been beneficial for you. So thank you so much.